I used to believe that life followed a logical and fair path. Hard work, loyalty, and doing the right thing should lead to stability and happiness. I never expected perfection. No marriage is flawless, but I truly thought that what Helena and I had was solid. Now, looking back, I realized just how naive I was. That evening, as I stood in front of the bedroom mirror adjusting my tie, I tried to shake off the lingering exhaustion from another relentless workweek. The annual company gala was never something I anticipated with enthusiasm, but it was part of the job: smiling, networking, showing up. These were all unspoken requirements for someone in my position. Helena was already dressed, waiting by the door, her attention fixed on her phone. Her expression was tight, her lips pressed into a thin line of impatience. Without glancing up, she muttered, "We're going to be late." She looked breathtaking in a sleek black dress that complemented her figure effortlessly. Helena always carried an air of elegance, something I had admired for years. Yet, that night, something felt different. "You seem tense," I remarked while reaching for my jacket. Only then did she lift her gaze, her expression unreadable. "It's been a long day. Let's just go." Her tone was distant, detached, unlike her. I should have asked her more, should have pressed for an answer. But I didn't. The event was held in a grand hotel ballroom where the soft melodies of jazz floated through the air, accompanied by the chime of glasses and murmured corporate conversations. The room buzzed with energy, yet I felt strangely out of place. As soon as we stepped inside, Helena's entire demeanor shifted. Her posture straightened, her eyes scanned the room with intent, and then, just like that, she was gone. One moment she was beside me, the next she had slipped away into the crowd, vanishing among the executives and their spouses as if she belonged somewhere else entirely. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling gnawing at my gut. I grabbed a drink, engaged in small talk, laughed at the right moments. But the nagging sense that something was wrong refused to fade. Then I saw her. Across the room she stood close, far too close, to another man. At first, I couldn't make out his face, only that he was taller than most around him, broad-shouldered, exuding the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Then he shifted slightly and recognition struck like a punch to the chest. Miles Harrington, an executive at our firm. Charismatic. Wealthy. The kind of man who never had to try too hard to have things fall into place for him. And at that moment, what he wanted was my wife. Helena was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Her fingers grazed his arm as she laughed at something he said, her body language open, inviting. My grip tightened around my glass. I told myself to stay rational. Maybe I was overreacting, misreading the situation. But deep down, I knew better. I moved toward them, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. The moment Helena noticed my approach, something flickered across her face. Guilt? Panic? Whatever it was, she masked it quickly with a composed smile. "Oh, Warren," she said smoothly, "I was just talking to Miles about the new marketing strategy." I turned to him. If he felt any guilt, he didn't show it. Instead, he seemed amused. "Nice to see you, Warren," Miles greeted, extending a hand. I shook it firmly, my mind racing. "Likewise." Helena casually placed a hand on my arm, a move so deliberate it felt like a rehearsed performance. "We were just catching up." Catching up. The words rang in my head, caught between denial and cold reality. I could have played along. Could have smiled, acted oblivious, convinced myself I was imagining things. But there was something about the way they looked at each other, the way she had forgotten my existence the moment we arrived, that made ignorance impossible. "Catching up," I repeated, keeping my voice steady. "Then you won't mind if I join you?" Helena hesitated for just a fraction of a second. But that hesitation was enough. Miles chuckled, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Of course not. The more, the merrier." And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being paranoid. Something was happening right in front of me, and this was only the beginning. I forced a smile, pretending I wasn't analyzing every glance, every slight movement between them. Helena had always been good at masking her emotions, but that brief hesitation spoke louder than any words. "We were just discussing upcoming projects," she continued, her voice light, casual. "Too casual. Miles has some interesting ideas for improving our marketing approach." Miles smirked, twirling his drink as if this was all a game to him. Maybe to him it was. I nodded, though my jaw clenched involuntarily. "Right? I'm sure it's fascinating." Helena shifted slightly, gripping the stem of her champagne glass a little too tightly. I recognized that look. She didn't want me here, and that realization hit harder than I expected. I was an outsider in my own marriage. Before I could utter another word, someone from the firm called Miles over, providing him with an effortless escape. As he left, he clapped me on the shoulder as if we were old friends, then leaned just a little too close to Helena, throwing out a casual, "We'll catch up later." I watched him walk away, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. Turning back to Helena, my expression had shifted, the previous smile gone. "You seem pretty close to him," I said, keeping my tone measured. She rolled her eyes, taking a slow sip of her drink as if my question was more exhausting than concerning. "Warren, don't start." "I'm not starting anything. Just asking a question." She let out a sharp breath, tilting her head back slightly as if summoning patience. "He's my colleague. We work together." "That's it. That's it?" I repeated, my gaze locked on her. Because from where I was standing, it looked like more than just work talk. Her eyes narrowed as she shot me a pointed look. "You're being ridiculous." Maybe I was. Maybe I was just another jealous husband imagining something that wasn't there. But deep down, I knew better. Before I could say more, a coworker suddenly grabbed Helena's arm, laughing as they pulled her toward the dance floor. She went without hesitation, without even sparing me a glance, leaving me standing alone, drowning in a realization that felt heavier than I was prepared for. I had already lost her. Not in the physical sense, not yet. But emotionally? She was already gone. I made my way to the bar, suddenly craving something much stronger than the polite cocktail I had been sipping. As I waited for my drink, my eyes drifted across the room. There she was, spinning under the golden lights, laughter spilling from her lips, carefree. She looked happy. No, she looked free. And I hated that I wasn't the reason why. For years, I had done everything to be the man she needed. I had been steady, reliable, supportive. But standing there, watching her, a painful truth settled in my chest. I wasn't the man she wanted. I downed my drink in one swallow, the burn doing nothing to dull the ache spreading through me. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, unnoticed, invisible in a life I was supposed to be part of. The party continued around me, music, chatter, laughter, all of it happening as if I weren't even there. And then I saw it. Helena slipping away from the dance floor, moving toward the hotel's balcony. And Miles following right behind her. I didn't hesitate. Glass still in hand, heart pounding, I followed. My stomach twisted under the weight of everything I already knew but still didn't want to accept. What I saw next shattered whatever shred of denial I had left. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. You can only decide what to do next. The crisp night air was a stark contrast to the warmth of the ballroom, the distant hum of music and conversation fading as I stepped onto the balcony. My pulse pounded in my ears. Helena stood near the railing, her back to me, gazing out at the city skyline. The glow of the streetlights below bathed her in a soft shimmer, making the moment look almost picturesque if I hadn't known better. And then there was Miles. He leaned against the railing, standing just a little too close, his body angled toward her in a way that was neither casual nor professional. His stance was relaxed, confident, like a man who had already won before the other player even realized they were in the game. I hesitated, gripping my glass so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Maybe I had misread the situation. Maybe it was nothing. But then he reached out. A subtle touch. His fingers brushed against her wrist, his thumb pressing lightly against the inside of her palm. Not accidental. Not meaningless. A choice. And Helena didn't pull away. She didn't step back. She didn't recoil. She let it happen. Something inside me twisted so violently that, for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. For years, I had been the kind of man who believed in trust, in patience, in giving the benefit of the doubt. I had ignored the late nights at the office, the whispered phone calls, the way she had started pulling away from me. I had convinced myself that all marriages went through rough patches, that this was just another one of those phases. But this wasn't a phase. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision. And it wasn't mine. I took a slow step forward, clearing my throat. Both of them turned at the sound. For just a fraction of a second, Helena's eyes widened, but she quickly smoothed her expression into something unreadable. Miles, on the other hand, barely reacted. If anything, he looked amused. "Warren," Helena said, her voice calm, controlled. "I didn't know you were out here." "Liar." Miles simply smiled, taking a slow sip from his drink, watching as though he were mildly entertained. "I needed some air," I said, forcing my voice to remain even, swallowing the betrayal that threatened to seep through. I gestured between them. "What about you too?" Helena tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit I had seen countless times before. "Just talking," she said. She said it so casually, as if the words carried no weight. Just talking. It wasn't just what she said, it was how effortlessly she let the lie slip from her lips. How little she seemed to care that I stood right there, watching her spin this falsehood as if it were nothing. I turned to Miles, my voice laced with disbelief. "Is that what we're calling it now?" His smirk deepened just enough to ignite a sharp, unwelcome anger in me. A part of me wanted to wipe that look off his face to let him know he hadn't won. But I refused to let him see me unravel. Look, Helena interrupted quickly, placing a hand on my arm, her voice filled with quiet urgency. Let's not do this here. Not at the party. As if where this moment happened was more important than what was happening. The setting didn't change the reality. I inhaled slowly, forcing myself to step back from her touch. You're right, I said evenly, my tone betraying nothing. This isn't the place. She visibly relaxed, thinking the confrontation was over. But then I locked eyes with her and added, but we will talk. Tonight. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her behind with the man she had just called a friend watching me go. But as I left, I caught something in Miles' expression, a flicker of satisfaction, a hint of triumph. He looked as if he had already won. That was the moment I made a decision. He hadn't won. Not yet. The car ride home was silent, thick with all the words we weren't saying. Helena sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her dress. My hands remained locked on the steering wheel, my jaw clenched so tight it felt like it might snap. My thoughts raced in circles, replaying the scene over and over, the way she stood too close to him, the way she let his hand linger, the way she had lied to my face as if it were nothing. When we stepped inside the house, it felt unfamiliar. Like it no longer belonged to me. Like I was standing in someone else's home. I had built this life with her. We had chosen every detail together, the furniture, the color of the walls, the little things that made it ours. But now, as I stood in the middle of what was once a shared dream, all I could see were the remnants of a marriage that felt like a ghost of itself. Helena set her purse down on the counter and turned to face me, arms folded tightly across her chest. All right, she said, her voice clipped. Let's just get this over with. A dry, humorless laugh escaped me. Get this over with? I repeated, shaking my head. You make it sound like this is some inconvenience. Like I'm the one making a problem out of nothing. She let out a sharp breath, pressing her fingers to her temples as if I were giving her a headache. Warren, nothing happened. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I took a slow step toward her, meeting her gaze with one of my own. The kind of look I knew unsettled her. So that's the game we're playing? Acting like what I saw tonight was nothing. Her expression hardened. I was talking to a colleague. That's all. The anger simmered beneath my skin, tightening in my chest like a vice. Talking, I repeated, my voice quiet but firm. He touched you, Helena. And you didn't pull away. You let him. My voice faltered at the last words, the hurt breaking through despite my effort to contain it. She hesitated just for a second. But it was enough. Are you sleeping with him? The question escaped before I had the chance to stop it. Her eyes widened before narrowing into a glare. How dare you? She shot back, her voice sharp with indignation. Do you really think I would cheat on you? I held her gaze, searching for something, anything. A flicker of guilt. A trace of remorse. A glimpse of the woman I used to know. But all I saw was defensiveness. I don't know what to think anymore, I admitted, my voice quieter now. The silence between us stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then she scoffed, shaking her head. You know what? I don't have to stand here and be interrogated like some kind of criminal. She turned, heading toward the stairs. Something inside me snapped. This is what you do, isn't it? My voice rose, frustration boiling over. You twist things around, make me feel like I'm the one being unreasonable. Like I'm the bad guy for noticing that my wife has checked out of our marriage. She stopped, her back still to me but didn't turn around. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. Just tell me the truth, Helena. Do you still love me? The silence that followed was unbearable. It stretched too long, each second hammering another nail into the coffin of everything we had built. And then, finally, she answered. I don't know. The words stole the breath from my lungs. It wasn't a confession. But it was enough. Enough to tell me that maybe this wasn't about Miles. Maybe it wasn't even about betrayal. It was about us. She didn't know if she loved me anymore. And somehow that hurt more than anything else ever could. I nodded slowly, forcing myself to swallow the lump rising in my throat. All right. She finally turned, arms still crossed, her expression unreadable. All right, what? I looked around at the house, the home that was supposed to be ours. At the life we were meant to build together. But I wasn't blind anymore. I'll make this easy for you, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. You don't have to figure out if you still love me. I'll decide for you. A flicker of confusion passed across her face. Her brows furrowed slightly. I took a deep breath and spoke the words that felt like both an ending and a beginning. I'm leaving. Her eyes widened, and for the first time that night, I saw something genuine. It wasn't guilt or defiance, just fear. Maybe she had convinced herself that no matter what happened, I would always be there. That no matter how far things unraveled, I wouldn't walk away. But she was wrong. Because, in truth, I had already left. I didn't sleep that night, and I doubted Helena did either. She stayed upstairs in our bedroom while I sat downstairs on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The silence wasn't comforting, it was suffocating. It was the kind of silence that lingers when there is nothing left to be said, when words have lost their meaning. By morning, the house felt different, emptier, like a place I was only passing through. I moved through my usual routine, but it felt mechanical, disconnected. Showering, getting dressed, making coffee, it was as though I were going through the motions of a life that no longer belonged to me. Helena came downstairs just as I was pouring my coffee. She looked as if she hadn't slept, her hair messier than usual, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She didn't speak at first, just grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and leaned against the counter, watching me. Eventually, she broke the silence. "So that's it?" I didn't look up. "What do you mean?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're just leaving?" Just like that. Turning to face her, I studied her expression. There was no anger, no desperation, only confusion. As if she genuinely didn't understand how things had come to this. And that was perhaps the most heartbreaking part of all. Because while I had spent years trying to hold this marriage together, she had spent those same years pretending nothing was wrong. "I'm leaving because I don't believe there's anything left worth fighting for," I said simply. "And if I'm the only one still trying, then what's the point?" Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." A dry, exhausted laugh escaped me. "Fair?" I repeated. "Helena, last night I asked if you still loved me and your answer was, 'I don't know.' Do you have any idea how painful that was? Do you even realize how much it took for me to ask that question in the first place?" She looked away, gripping the water bottle so tightly her knuckles turned white. I exhaled slowly, running a hand down my face. "I'm not interested in arguing. I just want to move on with my life. And you already have." Her head snapped up. "What's that supposed to mean?" I scoffed. "Do I really need to spell it out? Miles? The way you look at him. The way you let him touch you. If you haven't crossed the line yet, you were dangerously close." She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. And that told me everything I needed to know. Setting my coffee down, I realized I didn't want it anymore. "I'm quitting my job today," I said, my voice steady. "I won't work at the same company as the man my wife emotionally checked out of our marriage for." Helena's eyes widened. "You're quitting?" "Warren, that's it." "I don't care," I interrupted. "I'll figure it out. But I'm not going to be the guy who stays, pretending everything is fine while his wife builds a life with someone else." She swallowed hard, as if trying to find the words to argue but coming up empty. For a brief moment, I wondered if she regretted any of this, if she ever looked at me and wished she had made a different choice. But it didn't matter anymore. I turned toward the stairs. "I'll pack some things and be gone by tonight." "Warren," she said, her voice quieter now, uncertain. I stopped at the base of the stairs but didn't turn around. A long silence stretched between us before she finally asked, "Are you sure this is what you want?" Taking a deep breath, I let the weight of everything settle over me. Then, I spoke the most honest words I had in years. "No. But I know it's what I need." And with that, I walked upstairs, leaving behind the woman who had already left me long ago. Packing a suitcase for a life I never expected to leave behind felt surreal. Each item I placed inside: shirts, a pair of running shoes, my laptop, a few personal documents. Felt like another nail in the coffin of the life I had built with Helena. The closet remained half full, my side untouched except for the small section I was emptying. It reminded me of a house that had burned down, where a few rooms still stood intact. Fragments of what once was. Downstairs, I could hear Helena moving, opening and closing cabinets, her footsteps restless. I could almost picture her standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, biting her lip, debating whether to come upstairs and try to stop me. But she wouldn't. Not now. She had made her choice, and I was no longer a part of it. I zipped my bag, inhaling deeply before exhaling slowly. My heart was heavy, but my mind was clear. This was the right decision. Staying in that house felt like slowly suffocating, watching her drift further away from our marriage with each passing day. The warmth between us had been replaced by hollow conversations and gestures made out of obligation rather than love. I had been blind, ignoring the warning signs for far too long. Grabbing my belongings, I made my way downstairs, pausing momentarily at the threshold of the kitchen. Helena sat at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee she likely hadn't even taken a sip from. When she glanced up and saw me standing there, her face was unreadable. "So, you're really doing this?" she said, her voice flat. It wasn't a question, more of a confirmation. "I have to," I responded simply. She inhaled sharply before releasing a slow, controlled breath. And your job? You're seriously walking away from that too. I nodded. I sent in my resignation this morning. I'll stop by later to turn in my badge and clear out my desk. A crease formed between her brows. That's extreme, Warren. You don't have to throw everything away. A bitter chuckle escaped me. I'm not the one who threw everything away, Helena. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she averted her gaze, staring at the table as if the answers she sought could be found there. But I had no patience for rehashing the same conversation, the same arguments that never led anywhere. I'll come back for the rest of my things later, I told her. She gave a small nod as I adjusted the strap of my bag over my shoulder. I just need space right now. For a moment, she hesitated before finally nodding again. Where will you go? Exhaling, I ran a hand through my hair. Not sure. A hotel for now. Maybe a rental after that. I'll figure it out. For the first time in years, I saw something in her expression that resembled regret. But it wasn't enough. It never would be. Turning toward the door, I gripped the handle, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Warren, she said softly. I paused but didn't turn around. I never meant to hurt you. Closing my eyes, I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. There were so many things I could have said. That she had hurt me, that it had been happening long before Miles or that party, that love wasn't just about intentions but choices. But none of that mattered anymore. Instead, I said only, "Goodbye, Helena." And with that, I stepped out the door, leaving behind the woman who had stopped being my wife long before I had realized it. I had no idea what my next step would be, but for the first time in a long time, I was certain I was heading in the right direction. Leaving that house should have felt like freedom, like stepping into a new beginning. Instead, it felt like walking away from a fire I had spent years trying to put out, only to realize it had already burned to ashes long before I accepted the truth. I didn't look back as I got into my car. I knew that if I did, I might hesitate, might start questioning myself. And I couldn't afford that. Not now. The streets were eerily quiet as I drove away, the early morning light stretching long shadows across the pavement. I had no plan, no hotel booked, no one I had called for help. I just drove, letting the weight of my decision settle into my bones. I had walked away from my marriage, from my home, from my career, and yet, strangely, I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth was, I had been leaving for a long time. This was just the first time I had actually followed through. The highway stretched ahead of me, an endless path of asphalt leading nowhere in particular. Rolling down the window, I let the wind rush against my face, hoping it would clear my mind. My thoughts drifted back to Helena, to the look she had given me that morning. A mix of uncertainty, guilt, and maybe even relief. I thought about all the times I had convinced myself things would get better, that if I just tried harder, loved her more, things would fall back into place. But that had been the lie I clung to for years. Love didn't vanish overnight. It faded, slowly, piece by piece, until one day, you woke up and realized it was gone. Maybe she had figured that out long before I did. Maybe that was why she had stopped trying. A roadside diner appeared in the distance, and on impulse, I pulled into the parking lot. My stomach churned from stress, but I hadn't eaten since the party. I needed something to ground me in reality. As I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled. The place was nearly empty, save for a waitress behind the counter and an older man nursing a cup of coffee in the corner booth. I slid into a seat by the window, staring out at the road, wondering how many others had driven away from their old lives today. A woman in her 50s with weary eyes but a gentle smile approached and poured me a cup of coffee before I even asked. "You look like someone who could use something strong," she said. I let out a quiet, dry chuckle. "You have no idea." She gave me a knowing glance. "Heartbreak or job troubles?" I hesitated before shaking my head. "Both." She acknowledged my words with a knowing nod, as if she'd heard this tale more times than she could count. Then, with a confidence that made me want to believe her, she said, "Listen, sweetheart, you'll get through both. I wanted those words to be true. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting its warmth seep into me, trying to convince myself that this was not the end of everything, just the closing of one chapter. Yet, as I sat there, my gaze fixed on my reflection in the dark liquid swirling inside my cup, another realization surfaced. I wasn't just grieving the loss of my marriage. I was mourning the version of myself that had existed within it. Without him, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I lingered in that small diner for a long time, my hands wrapped around the cooling cup as I wrestled with the weight of it all. The sense of loss was still heavy, but beneath it, something else was beginning to emerge. A quiet, almost imperceptible understanding. I wasn't shattered. I was free. For years, I had been burdened by a marriage that had been unraveling, convincing myself that if I just held on tighter, if I just fought harder, I could mend what was breaking. But love isn't something you fight to keep. It's something that flourishes when two people choose to nurture it, to grow it together. And Helena had stopped choosing me a long time ago. The hardest part hadn't been leaving. It had been accepting that I had been alone in this relationship far longer than I had ever admitted to myself. But now, in the quiet of this diner, with no obligations and no one waiting for me, I felt something stir within me. Something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts, my finger hovering over a name I hadn't called in months. A brief hesitation, then I pressed dial. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Warren? Man, it's been a while. A smile spread across my face. Genuine, unforced, something I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. Yeah, it has, Noah. Listen, are you still looking for someone to help with that startup project? There was a pause, followed by a chuckle. Absolutely. Are you finally ready to leave that corporate grind behind? I exhaled slowly, my eyes drifting to the open road beyond the diner window. Yeah, I think I am. We talked for a while, and by the time I ended the call, I had something I hadn't had in a long time. A plan. A real one. I wasn't just walking away from something painful. I was stepping towards something new. A fresh career. A different life. A version of myself that wasn't defined by past failures or the love that had slipped away. After settling my bill and leaving a generous tip, I stepped outside and drew in a deep breath of crisp morning air. The first light of the sun stretched across the sky, painting it in soft shades of gold and orange. A new day, a fresh beginning. Sliding into my car, I started the engine. This time I didn't look back. Instead, I pressed forward, leaving behind everything that no longer belonged to me. For the first time in years, I wasn't clinging to something that had already slipped through my fingers. I was ready for whatever lay ahead. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Excitement for the future.